the Shawntay Skilldigger here, and I am so excited to have you all join us today for our final session of our book club on design for how people learn.
Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be back here. Thank you, Shawntay. So, as you probably already know, we are thrilled to have the author of our book club, Design for How People Learn, Julie Dirksen, here with us live today. And if you didn't know, Julie is not only an author, she's an influencer in the instructional design industry. She is highly respected. She travels all over for lots of conferences. She's an international speaker, and she's been recognized by the e-learning guild as a guild master. So as a learning strategist, her expertise is in instructional design, digital technology, and behavior change. And she's also the founder of usablelearning.com. And that link will be dropped in the chat for you as well. So welcome, Julie, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thanks for doing the book club. That's really wonderful. I appreciate it.
We've all so enjoyed it. And just, it gave us an opportunity to all get together so many times over the past few weeks and just learn together in so many different ways. So really thank you again for writing a terrific book.
Oh,
So
thank you.
Yeah. So to start us off, can you just tell us a little bit about how you got started in instructional design?
Yeah, so one of the ways that I think instructional design, a lot of people come to it. There's a few different paths, but one of the really common ones is hey, you're a good customer service rep. We're going to let you train the other customer service reps. I think mine was, hey, you're good at processing loan applications. We're going to let you train other people to process loan applications. I was working for a finance company, and I'd gotten a little bit interested in education because I had done a certificate program on teaching English as a foreign language, which I did for a bit. But the the piece of like, hey, you've got some domain knowledge, we're going to let you teach it to other people. I think that's a really common story for a lot of people, and it was very much kind of the target audience for the book to a certain extent, because so many people have all of this expertise in their area, but not necessarily. And then they get asked to teach it, and so they have to get kind of up to speed very quickly on some of the learning pieces and some of how to think about it and how to think about putting together good learning experiences, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's that accidental instructional designer. You're working in the
Yep.
field and then they're like, hey, can you do this?
Yeah, and when I
Wow.
was doing it, I was doing classroom training, but I really, which I like a certain amount of, kind of being in front of the room and facilitating stuff. But I don't like doing it, all day long every day. And the people who can manage that, absolute props to them because it's a huge energy thing. So the people who are really great at that, I have a lot of admiration for. But yeah, I got more interested in kind of how do you put together the curriculum in the classroom and how do you use the technology and all of those different kinds of pieces. So that led me over to graduate school for instructional design and to really kind of dig into learning technology, that kind of thing.
Well, we're really glad you did because we love everything that you've been able to share with us and through your book. So, Julie, chapter 3, pages 68, 69, and 70, where you talked about inverting the order of Bloom's taxonomy,
Oh,
that for whatever reason, like totally, I had this aha moment. I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense because sometimes we want to make sure that, when we're seeing where that knowledge gap is, a lot of times they have that understanding, that lower level, but let's see where they are and if they can apply it at a higher level and then kind of move back down to narrow down exactly where, that's how I interpreted exactly where maybe that gap is in their understanding. Am I right on that thought process, or did you have a
yeah.
different?
Oh, I think that's a perfectly good way to kind of think about it. Like, let's get into application and see where it's working, not working, and then we can kind of address some of those areas. So that's sort of, you do that sometimes with problem-based learning or, like starting with application and then filling in with knowledge. Those are all, I think, absolutely like good viable strategies for kind of creating those sorts of things. Because part of the reason, I debated whether I should include Bloomsday taxonomy at all, but I know that it's a common tool and people use it a lot, and so I wanted to make sure that people, people had the opportunity to kind of not because it gets presented in a pyramid, which I'm not sure that actually is even a thing. Like there's this idea that we have to do the lower levels before we can go up to the higher levels. And so I wanted to kind of say, well, maybe not,
Right.
there are other ways to do this. So
I did like that. And then chapter 7, page 207, where you were talking about the CCAF, content, challenge, activity, feedback, to really have that frequency of feedback. I find even with the courses I'm taking for my master's degree, there's not a lot of feedback. And you'll do an activity, and then it's like a week and a half before you hear back whether you even did it right or wrong. We need more frequency with that feedback. So I try, when I'm thinking about designing learning solutions, to include that as much as I can. So when I saw your model there, I was like, oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and that comes from Michael Allen, who if people are designing e-learning and they haven't picked up his book, I think they really, really should, because I think it's a terrific book, where he gets into the whole context, challenge, activity, feedback. But yeah, the feedback thing is a really interesting one. I sometimes talk about the fact that most learning technology treats the basic fundamental unit of learning as a piece of content, and the dog's at my feet, and she's managing to drink from her bowl really noisily right now. So if there's background noise, that's what's going on. But treats the idea that the fundamental little brick in the wall, kind of like the fundamental unit, or building block of learning, is a piece of content. And really, I think that that's the wrong framing for stuff. I think a better framing would be to think about a learner action with feedback as the fundamental unit of learning, because that really is how it becomes real for people and how they learn to apply it and all of those kinds of things. And I think we'd have very different learning technology if that was the underlying principle behind the things that people were building. And so particularly in digital environments, people get really starved of feedback, but I think in all of the learning environments, we're mostly starved of it. I do an activity sometimes, in workshops, where I'm talking about things that we can learn from games, and we'll play 5 minutes of Diner Dash, which is it's an old casual game that, I don't know if anybody plays it anymore. I mean, but you could pick any video game, literally, and then ask the question of how often and what type of feedback is the player getting in this environment. And they're like, oh, well, they're getting noises, and they're getting visual cues, and they get the facial expressions of the other characters, and they get, the impact of what happens, and da da da. They can make a list of like a dozen things easily that are methods of feedback. And then when we look at how often, they're like, oh, every few seconds, right? And then you think about the way that e-learning courses are traditionally structured or something like that, you can go like 10 minutes without getting any kind of feedback. And that's even in a good course that has knowledge checks periodically or something like that. And so when we look at these things, especially skills-based practice, how do people get feedback in those environments? I think there's really a long way for us to go in terms of things like practice and feedback design.
Well,
okay, Tony, I also put chapter 7 down as my favorite chapter, and it was really centered around the feedback that Julie is talking about. And to me, whenever I read a book, even if it's in the L&D space, which is what we all do, I always think about how does this apply to other contexts too, right? So it's not just the learner getting feedback, but in almost everything that we do, every type of development, whether it is employee coaching or mentorship or raising children or having a strong relationship with your partner, it all revolves around that communication piece and giving that really strong feedback. So I was looking at what Julie had in her book, and I've said this all along in our book club series, it doesn't really matter what level of an instructional designer you are. There is important and good takeaways in Julie's book. I mean, so there's something here for everybody. But this feedback component, like a lot of times, we're asked to create something because there's an issue in the workplace, or there is a new technology that is rolling out. And so like we're checking the box, trying to get it done, and we're not thinking about that feedback component and how that we bring it in. So I love like all the different various ways that Julie brought out examples of how we can incorporate feedback into the learning experience and how important it is. So that was my favorite chapter from the book.
Abby says chapter 3, page 69 and 70, where Julie defines the importance of assessing necessary proficiency. And it's because not all learners need to be 1000% knowledgeable on the topic. And it's just important when designing performance objectives. And then that it's funny, Abby, I actually put a second item on for me as to what I also liked about chapter 3. And it was that's the same scale. Is it, Julie, is it Gloria Gary's?
Gary?
Or
Yep.
Yes. Her
Yeah, Gloria
scale,
Gary.
adjusting how proficiency. Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. The whole question of, what proficiency do people need to have? I don't think we predefine that very often, right? We're like, they need to know this. Well, what level of knowledge do they need to have of, topic X? Do they need to be able to like, oh, it's familiar and I know where I'd go look if I needed more information? Or is it, I need to be able to use this, in my work on an ongoing basis? Or is it, I need to have this so dialed in, I'm not going to make any mistakes with it, So, and those are very different, those are very different targets in terms of what kind of learning experience people need to have. If it's just familiarity, which is a lot of the stuff we do, then sure, kind of just introducing it and making sure that people will remember it the next time, it'll at least sound familiar the next time it comes up. Or is it something where I need you to drill on this until you are like note perfect, where we need to do the overlearning piece and you can absolutely be reliable in, high stress environments to be able to pull out the right thing when you need it. And that's just the knowledge base versus, skills or, procedures or something like that. And so being able to define that, because like I saw a thing on LinkedIn, oh gosh, a couple of months ago where somebody's like, why would the passing score at a quiz be 80%? Like, is there 20% of your work that's just not necessary? I think it should be 100%. And I was like, well, hang on. We can get people to 100%, but it's costly, right? It's costly in terms of the effort that we're going to put into this. It's costly in terms of it's costly in terms of the time that the learners need to spend putting towards this. Like if you really say that 100% is absolutely crucial, then there's strategies for getting there. You're probably never going to get completely there, but like you have to decide it's worth it, and not everything is. The example I use when I'm talking about what's the tolerance for error in something, it's not the same in everything. So if you're training flight attendants, you're going to have a very different tolerance for error when it comes to safety procedures than when it comes to drink service, right? You can get more things wrong in drink service and it's okay. Oh, I gave them too many cookies. Oh, well, like as opposed to, getting stuff wrong in terms of like the safety procedures for evacuating the airplane, where we have a different standard for these. They are not the same thing. So being able to kind of be realistic about that and not pretend, because we everybody's heard it's all important. They need all of it. And it's like, well, no, actually, that might not be true. So being clear-eyed about that, I think is a useful part of the process.
So true. And sometimes even organizations want it to be 100%. Like I'm thinking of like compliance training and ethics, right? There's a legal reason that they're looking for 100% mastery of that content versus like, okay, you kind of just need to know what the guidelines are. Don't take money, don't accept gifts, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And, I may have been known to occasionally ask people in compliance training environments if they really care if the training works, because they don't always. Sometimes they just need something that they can put in the lawsuit later to say that, yes, we did train people. So it's about legal defensibility and not about actual competence in the learners. That, yeah, happens maybe once in a while. So, that kind of thing.
Awesome. I mean, I just can't believe how we expanded on all those questions, or we made an expansion of it. Julie, here's one of our first questions.
Okay.
Now that we've all finished your book, what advice would you give to our community members here who are inspiring instructional designers?
So it goes actually back to the previous point, which is one of the biggest challenges I think we all face in the field is we don't get enough feedback on our own efforts. And so a lot of it comes down to how do I find out if what I'm doing is effective for people, right? And if you're teaching it in front of a classroom, you at least get the feedback of, okay, they seem to understand that. Oh, wait, there's some confusion there. Oh, that activity was kind of, people it was challenging for
Okay.
people, whatever. But when we move into digital environments, it's harder in virtual than it is in person to kind of get some of that feedback. And it's really hard to get it in any kind of like self-study e-learning, kind of thing if that's what you're building. So the question becomes, how do I get some kind of feedback loop for myself as a practitioner? Um, and there's a few, there's different sort of main strategies for doing that. One is and then there's always the question of, did they actually go back to the workplace and do something different based on the stuff that I gave them? And that one's usually the hardest to see. And so in terms of strategies around a feedback loop, one of the things you can do is you can, it's not perfect from a research standards point of view, but you can like try to at least follow up with a subsection of your audience, right? You created a training program that went out to 2,000 people. Can I follow up with 20 of them and find out if they're doing something different? Or it could be user testing is great. So if you're building any kind of digital resource, um, uh, user testing, which comes from like user experience and human computer action, usability, all of those kinds of things. There's lots of places online that will teach you how to do that. And the really great book on that is Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think. If you're designing any kind of digital resources, to read that and use the test method for user testing, because we've all got Zoom and several dozen Zoom proxies. That's actually really easy to do now if you can just get a couple of sample users, preferably people in your target audience. But if you can't get people in your target audience, the closest you can get to it, basically. Have them pull up the course and watch them go through it and see, and have them kind of talk to the reactions to it and see, did this make sense to people? Were they able to navigate the screen? Did they know that they were supposed to click on the thing and play whatever? All of those kinds of things. And so that can be a method. Um, I'll sometimes ask people, and I can ask the audience, have you ever taught something live in a classroom where you changed absolutely nothing about your approach between the first time you taught it and the second time you taught it? And I've asked that question in a lot of rooms, and the answer has always been no. Of course, you change some stuff, like you adjust, right? The first time it's kind of hot mess, and then it gets better as you go on. Well, we're missing that feedback loop in a lot of our digital resources. We don't have any way to make adjustments based on the first hot mess pass through to smooth it out and to make it better. So something like user testing can be really important there. So, getting some kind of, feedback, follow-up interviews are great. Brinkerhoff success case model is one way to do that, to do a survey in your audience and then talk to the people who are like all in and find out what worked for them, and the people who really didn't work for and find out what didn't work for them. There's a number of different strategies for kind of building in some kind of feedback loop for yourself. Because if you're not getting any feedback, you're probably also not improving your practice at a rate that we would all want for our own professional purposes.
Oh, I agree with that, because some of the courses that I'm taking right now, they have the survey at the end. And although the instructors will let you give them feedback, unprompted feedback sometimes when you're asking questions and trying to tell them that something's not
Mhm.
working right. But by the time you're done with a 7 to 12, 14-week course or learning experience, and now it's time to take the survey, that, some of the things that maybe had caused a problem 3 or 4 weeks ago have escaped us if we didn't write it down. So I think that's why I was thinking, okay, we need to talk to some of the people putting these e-learning together, that they need to have feedback more often, or ask for feedback more often, because when I'm done with an assignment, I might want to, or an activity, I want to give you feedback right now on how what I thought of it, not in 4 weeks. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what goes through my mind.
It's another example of proximity too, right? So it's like, but this is an example of proximity of the survey or the evaluation or the feedback to that learning experience. And I mean, especially like where we are today, I mean, we want everything quick, right? We binge Netflix. We don't want to wait until the next season. It's like, I'm going to watch this episode, this episode, this episode. It's true in this learning environment too. Whenever we do something, we want feedback. We want to grow. We want to get better. I don't want to wait forever to get good at something. I've been studying Spanish for a long time, and I find that it is very hard for me to read a book and try to memorize some words. But like whenever I want to get like that big burst of progress, like I go into the culture and I just immerse myself. And I get plenty of feedback every time I say a word incorrectly, right? So that I grow in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been trying to figure out, and I don't know if I'm going to get this this problem, but I've been trying to figure out how to have, like basically the ability to submit feedback on every page of a digital resource. So like, I'm confused by this. I don't understand. You can click your little icon at the bottom and be like, I'm confused by this. I don't understand. And like actually get it tagged to the content. I don't think that like we'd necessarily be able to help everybody immediately, in those, because of just the sheer challenge of keeping up with all that stuff. But if you're periodically revising things, you could accumulate those and go in and fix some of the stuff that was confusing, or like, oh, I don't think this example really works, or whatever the feedback is. We don't You're always going to get feedback that you're like, oh, sigh, okay. But like, I wanted something different. I love it when I read a movie review where they're like, I didn't like this romance. I think it should have been more of a mystery. And I'm like, well, then go watch a mystery. Yeah. I'm always bemused by those, but but yeah, having a mechanism that's much more immediate. Because yeah, if I was confused on module 2 and then I put an end of course thing after module 10, nobody's going to remember to mention that they were confused on module 2. Like that's way in the rear view at that point. Like, no, you're not going to be able to find any of that stuff out. So making that mechanism a little bit easier for people and trying to figure out ways to do it.
Right. And even as the instructional designer or the facilitator, when I was in the classroom, proximity to me and getting that, let's say, body language feedback, even from students, was, I could see what they were doing. Or if I thought something wasn't working out right, I could go and peek over their shoulder. I could go stand next to them and I could see what was happening. And then I could adjust right away. I could just adjust to my next lesson. But you're right, we don't have that exposure in that same way in our e-learning projects. So I like the idea of having some kind of instant feedback or a button, even if that data is collected behind the scenes. And then, I don't know, I like graphs and charts and Excel documents where I can look and see, ooh, which one had the most frequency? Is that something I need to take a look at now, later? Can it wait till a revision? And gathering that data as we go through. Is that something that, is it AXPI would cover? XAPI?
Yeah, potentially. The one of the harassment points of if anybody's using authoring tools, if they could pretty please, as a favor to me, ask for custom XAPI statements in their authoring tools, because we have a real limitation right now. Because right now there's a lot of the authoring tools will do like a fixed XAPI statement, like course module completion or things like that. But there's a really weird thing happens, oh gosh, back in the early 2000s, quite honestly, around stuff like SCORM and things like that, where they decided that the only thing that we needed to know about users in e-learning environments was like, did they complete stuff and did they get a particular score on the test. And if you think about it, like, there's a whole bunch of other stuff you'd want to know. Did they click on all the stuff on this screen? Did they spend time, doing stuff? Did they, did they answer the question? Did they think about it first? There's a huge amount of data that we would love to know about how our users are behaving, but because there's no kind of pipeline mechanism for transmitting that, we generally are, it's like peering at our users through a drinking straw. Like we get a tiny, tiny bit of information about um, what they're doing. And XAPI, at least in theory, could expand that quite a bit because I can track, virtually anything in an XAPI statement. The difficulty is that most of the rapid authoring tools that people are using don't allow for you to kind of draft your own XAPI statements. And the exact of how to do this is way nerdier than I want to get into. Personally, I have smart friends who do this stuff. Um, but there's no reason why we shouldn't know more about what our users are doing or how they're interacting with the things that we build or what's going on with them or any of that kind of stuff. But we've unfortunately really throttled the pipe of information that we're getting it into a format where we're only finding out, did they finish it? We might find out they spent X number of minutes on the screen or, things like that. And so an XAPI statement sort of says, the actor, so the learner, you know, read or did or, interacted with or did something with this thing. And if we could have those be kind of customizable, we could find out all sorts of stuff. So yeah, but that's all a work in progress, unfortunately. I think if we could just break open some of the authoring tools, because I think that's the biggest issue at this point, is having some ability as the person creating the courseware where you can, manipulate what kind of variables you're passing out in terms of data on the screen. So like it would be really great if I could say count how many, like I give them a page of links or something to outside stuff. Maybe I want to know, did they click on 2 links or did they click on 7 links? Did they click on no links? Nobody clicks on any links ever, so maybe I don't even need this page. Those kinds of things.
Right. Thank you for expanding on that because I love data and I'm always curious. Shawntay's accelerator program, when I was going through it, I was like, can you see through do you use Teachable? Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I always ask, I'm like, can you see how long somebody was watching that video or how long they were in that module? And really, you don't have that data, do you?
I have data. There is some data, but it's not like how long. But I can see,
Okay.
like, for example, a video. I can see how much of that video they watch. I think we like in a tool like MailChimp or something like that, along the lines of what Julie's talking about. You actually collect more data about a person than you typically see in our learning management systems, which marketers need all that information. That's why they collect it. But it seems like building off of what Julie is saying, it's like a miss in our L&D space that we're not capturing similar types of data so that we know how to improve that learning experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I've got another question for you. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, if you could get, for example, let's say you're training nurses or whatever, and you could just get them to fill out years of experience at the front, and then you could actually like slice and dice your results in the e-learning course based on years of experience. And just, like there's a bunch of ways that you could like have a lot of insight. Oh, these nurses at this past the 10-year mark, don't even make them do this. They don't need it, versus
Right.
like somebody else might, want to be able to test out. Like there's a whole slew of ways that we could be interacting with our audience that we can't because of the way that, like I said, the data's been throttled. So anyway, I'll stop soapboxing on that one though.
No, I love it.
I do too.
So here's something else that we all loved. Your analogy using the elephant throughout the book. Can you talk about how you decided to come up with that or expand on it for us?
Yeah, well, it comes from Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist, and he does a lot of. He's moved on quite a bit from the book that one comes from, which is called The Happiness Hypothesis. But it's most kind of like behavioral economics. Daniel Kahneman has like thinking fast and slow, so like system 1, system 2, and I found those hard. Those were hard for people to remember. I can't even always remember which one's which, and so the rider and the elephant, because it's so visual, is a really nice one. And there's this different decision making, right? Your brain wants different things at the same time, and so being able to kind of have a mental image of those entities. One of the big things that you hear all the time is that we have these limits to our attention span. Like 10 minutes or shorter than a goldfish, which is completely wrong. But and if you want me to, I'll soapbox about the goldfish too. But the the idea that we have a limited attention span is really funny in the age of like Netflix binges, right? I can pay attention to the Netflix series about like competitive cocktail mixing for like 4 hours and whatever, but I can't pay attention for more than 10 minutes in a course. Well, of course I can. Like, of course you can pay attention for a long time in a course. But the problem is we don't necessarily is which system we're leaning on. So if it's the rider dragging the elephant along, like this is boring content, but you just need to force yourself to pay attention to it, then yeah, then you maybe get 10 minutes before, everybody's tired. But if it's something that's intrinsically interesting, there's probably no practical limit to how long people can pay attention. I mean, eventually they're going to get, hungry or tired or things like that. But otherwise, so the rider and the elephant are really nice because they help us kind of think about deliberate design decisions. So we tend to talk to the rider a lot with, heavy technical training with a lot of verbiage and a lot of jargon. Like that's all rider versus elephant, which, likes things that it can see and touch and interact with, and, likes things that have an emotional context or a physical context. And if you're consciously trying to, design for the elephant to a certain extent, which is probably what I should have called this book. But because people would remember that better than design for how people learn. Even like I have even good like friends who will still screw up the book title. But if I had said design for the elephant, people would remember that. But the the whole issue of trying to make sure that the things that we're designing have immediate application is one of the big things, some kind of emotional context. Like we talk about emotional stuff as it's like a touchy-feely extra, but one of the things that there's good research on in the neuroscience is the idea that your emotional reaction is a gauge of how important something is. And so if you feel it, then you go, okay, that's more important. If you feel an emotional reaction, you go, okay, that's really important. Whether it's like, oh, that's interesting, or oh, okay, that's a serious problem, or whatever. The degree to which you have an emotional feeling says this is more important than this other thing over here. And so when we create learning experiences that are devoid of any kind of emotional resonance, what we're doing is we're talking entirely to the rider part of the brain, and we're telling the elephant that this isn't actually important, which has the expected result of not working very well. So, you know.
Well,
but yeah, no, I love that metaphor too. So it's been very handy.
I like that idea of don't change the name of the title, but just knowing that that could have been the title is really interesting, because I think every discussion that we had every week, we brought up the elephant. Somebody did at some point. Abby asks, since publishing your book, Julie, has the pandemic changed some of the examples that you would have used throughout your book? Have you thought of any new ways that you could have integrated something different?
Well, the one of the topics that that I've been thinking a little bit about with the pandemic is when we take people out of their work environment, we put them in a classroom. We've already sort of talked about you get all these physical cues and these nonverbal things that help you with your feedback and things like that. There's obviously the relationship building that happens between students, but then there's also the sorry, I had just thought and it did the thing. There's also the attention piece of that, which is I've been moved outside of my normal environment, which helps kind of create a safe bubble for me to pay attention to things. And so when people are at their desks, in their normal office environment, attending a virtual session, we're not getting that same thing. And so thinking about like actual strategies for helping people with that. Because again, even when they want to pay attention to it, their elephant is like, that thing, an email just popped up, this thing over here. And so we don't get that kind of like a little bit of protective barrier between us and our day-to-day stuff when we're working right from our desk, as opposed to when we've gone into a classroom. And so that's its own set of challenges. Most of the principles are the same. Like, I don't think there's big things about the book that I would change. I mean, I was deliberately leaning into principles and things that are pretty evergreen in terms of, these are principles we've known about for a really long time. Most of them are not changing per se. So,
but we need to be better about doing them, applying them.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. Sarah asks, how can I transfer? Well, this is a little bit different from the book, but how can I transfer my career from being a traditional teacher to an e-learning designer? Do you have any advice so basically, what advice would you have for any career changer, not just someone that's a teacher, anybody who's a career changer who are looking to break into instructional design?
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I had a moment of things. Breaking into instructional design. Yeah, I think getting some projects and getting some things to work on. Trying out some stuff, and so getting some demonstrable efforts. So whether it's like pro bono work or something where you can build up a portfolio a little bit. Like, I think that's all really important stuff. Obviously, depending on what aspect of things you're interested in, it might be getting familiar with the technology. It might be about getting, a lot of people will come in, from like a multimedia focus, or from a content writing focus, or from an, pure instructional design focus, or from from a like teaching classroom focus and things like that. And those things should be helpful. I do think the expectation these days about how many different things an instructional designer should be able to do have gotten kind of, quite frankly, a little bit out of control. I don't think it's realistic to expect somebody to be good at like parsing large quantities of content and like understanding user needs and talking to stakeholders and also doing graphic design, or like figuring out how to load stuff to the LMS. Like, this is a really wide swath of things. And when I got started in e-learning, I had a graphic designer. I fulfilled a role of both project management and instructional design, but I could hire content writers, and I had a developer, right? Like, so something like, how does this get how does the SCORM package get loaded up to the LMS was not my problem. Well, okay, sometimes it was, but but the degree to which we think any one person should be able to do all the things is kind of unrealistic at this point.
It's coming back into that level of proficiency, right? Like, you can know a little about a lot of things, or you can know a lot about a handful of things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that an instructional designer does have an element of being a generalist about it, right? Like, part of what usually is a characteristic of a good instructional designer is that they learn quickly. And so we can learn a bunch of stuff quickly, and I'm happy that I had to learn how to code HTML, and I'm happy that I know about like, screen resolution for graphics and how to crop things in Photoshop and all of this kind of stuff. But the expectation that we're going to be proficient at all of those things, like, that's a bit of a problem. Jane Bozarth did a thing for the Learning Guilds. Oh gosh, a couple of years ago. It was the salary report, and she looked at kind of the mushrooming of job descriptions for instructional designers and how they want you to have kind of all of these things. And I'm like, I just don't think this is realistic. So I'm sorry that everybody who's getting started is getting handed these job descriptions that have 97 bullet points of competency.
It is.
Like,
It's a lot. I'll tell you, I look at them all the time, and I cannot believe about all the different. It's like you want one person to do it all, in a sense.
Yeah.
Shawntay jokes and calls me a mega learner, but I am still, even though I'm dabbling and working a bit here or there, doing some contract work, I'm still trying to figure out what part of instructional design, what area is what I'm really going to like. So far, I've decided that I really like designing and editing audio and video. Whenever I get into those elements, I feel like I get lost in the day and time goes by and I feel fulfilled. I don't know why. I also like presenting. So I'm that teacher or that presenter that could be on my feet all day long in front of an audience of 100 people and still have all that energy. That is what I used to do and I loved, and I kind of miss it because behind the screen, I don't have that time. I don't get that opportunity all the time.
Yeah.
And I can't always see my audience's face and read their reactions. So that's a little bit different, but I'm still trying to figure out what area of instructional design is where I even fit. So I know for anybody that's brand new to it, it's a lot. It's almost overwhelming.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of these things where Tim Ferriss has a question where he says, find out what's easy for you that other people find hard. I phrase it a little bit differently. I'm like, figure out which parts of your day give you the most energy. Because, the best kind of work is I'm kind of exhausted at the end of it, but I'm still sort of also charged up about it. And having that feeling you should be, I think those things are your superpowers and you should always be leaning into that stuff. I'm not saying that you never have to do the tedious energy draining work. Like it would be great if I never had to read contracts or do invoicing, but like then I don't get paid. So like here we are.
Right.
But like not continually. I did project management for about 10, 12 years. And when I finally stopped doing a lot of project management, I'm like, oh, I kind of hated project management. I'm really happier now that I'm not doing that. So, so I think, like when I first started doing project management, it was the path in to have control of a project and to be, kind of have my arms around things. And so I wouldn't trade out that experience, but boy, and I mean, now I'm self-employed. So of course I have to do a certain amount of project management, but like I wouldn't, I was like, oh, this isn't, doesn't play well to my superpowers. When I was managing a team, as much as they were great and I liked working with them, I really, really disliked the fact that took most of my attention away from actually doing the work and actually getting my hands on the design pieces. That, like I'd get to do that 10% of my time, and then the other 90% was just coordinating other people's work. And like that's figuring those things out for yourself, asking yourself, where do you get energy from? What is good, kind of interesting, hard, what is a challenge, but that it, doesn't make you feel drained, but makes you feel, at least like entertainingly challenged, or at least, good exhausted. Like all of those kinds of things I think are really important because I'm not sure that we learn to listen to those impulses as much as we should. And, like, because a promotion is great, right? Everybody wants that. Well, not if it means you're doing work that is poorly suited to you, that you don't enjoy. Then it's not a good promotion, no matter what the salary bump was. So
exactly. And I love that we are in a time, or at least it seems to me, that we're talking more about energy management and being intentional with how we spend our time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that, Julie. So we loved having you, Julie, and I wish I could talk to you forever. And
thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for participating in the book club.